We'll call the 8th October meeting of the Manhattan City Commission, excuse me, to order. And first element of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you please rise and follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just to remind everyone, this is a work session, so no votes will be taken. In some cases, the staff is looking for a little bit of guidance as they work some of these issues along. Our first item will be Convention and Visitors Bureau, so Karen and Ben.
Good evening, Commissioners. Let's get this pulled up. Escape. Huh? Look, we're out of there. And then... I know we're in here. Found it. Now we're ready.
Good evening, Commissioner, city staff, and members of the audience and citizens listening at home. We are delighted to present the activities of the third quarter reflecting July through September 2019. As you guys know, I'm Ben Sigel. I'm the chairman of the Manhattan Steering Committee for 2019. You'll get to see my smiling face one more time. And then Karen's kicking me out of here. Well, that's the story and I'm sticking to it. So, as we reflect on the third quarter and some of the highlights, for me, it's a personal one that just happened, and some of you were there to see it. Was the Bleeding Kansas Gravel Duro. That bike event was in its second year this year, and in its first year we had about 120 riders. This year we had 250, so it more than doubled. I see great promise with this event, and the feedback has been tremendous. In fact, I just spoke with my friend Bobby Wintle down in Stillwater when I was there this last weekend, and his event, the Land Run 100, which happens in March, has 2,500 people in it for this next year. He capped it out, he took 2,000 registrations in the first 6 minutes of the registration being open on the day of our event. So, and he told me that his event in the second year had 250 people as well. So it's very promising. It's going to bring, I think we had, I can't remember how many states I said we had represented, but like 20 states represented. We had somebody from outside the country. So very, very much as a runner, I'm still very much looking forward to this bike event continuing to grow and help the Manhattan community.
See if you can do something about the wind next year.
Yeah. You don't know how many riders I had come past me at mile 80 cursing me for that wind that they rode about 60 miles into on that day. So that's one of the things when you have outdoor events, you just never know what you're going to have, whether it be the wind or the rain, as we know in Kansas this year. It's part of, I think when you sign up for a 100-mile bike event, you're a little crazy anyway, and so you'll take what the weather gives you. So,
Ben, is it always the same route?
No, it changes a little bit year to year, and we're already actually looking at some exciting changes that are going to happen this next year that will, I think, will also help draw some competitors in. That will be kind of fun.
We have wonderful Flint Hills, don't we?
Yes, we do. The hills are they're pretty nasty out there. The mission of the Manhattan Convention and Visitors Bureau is to expand the local area economy by attracting visitors, which as the Gravel Duro did. And we actually, I can't remember, I think we had about 20 states represented as well. The following day we did the Conquer the Kanza run, which we'll talk about both these events a little bit later on, but that event capped out again at over 350 runners and drew a good crowd the following Sunday. We've had a few people that did the bike race on Saturday and then the Kanza race on Sunday. So they're full on crazy. But at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Karen, and she's going to kind of go through some of our statistics for this year.
Ben always gets to talk about the fun things, and I get to talk about the numbers. So depending on which you like better depends on who gets to present. So Due to the timing of our presentations, we're always a month behind, and I haven't received yet the STAR report for the month of September. But I wanted to go through again how our hotels are performing with through year to date. Through August, you will see that our occupancy year to date was 64% occupancy with a 98.26 average daily rate and a 62.90 cents revenue per room. That's up just 0.4% from August of last year, with the average daily rate year to date up $1.41, and the revenue per room is up $1.26. This next slide, I think you had requested this, and we also find it very interesting when we're comparing month to month. What did August look like in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19? Obviously, the month of August was when our students returned to us. But you will see that August to August, this August, our occupancy was at 66.1%. That's a difference between the year to date, but what the actual August was. That's up 0.2% from the year before. The average daily rate is $99.57, which that took a significant jump from last August of $5.91. And then for the revenue per room was $65.80 for the month of August, which again was up $4.04. So it's always interesting to us to see which week was the best performance. I had sent to you originally that our best week for the third quarter was a week in July. That occupancy for the week of July was running at 72.7% occupancy. We always look to see what was in town in mid-July. July tends to be traditionally that time when people are on vacation, it's hot, the wind blows, and there's very little rain. That specific week, though, was a great week for us. In fact, that we hosted the Heartland Square Dancers Association that brought in about 250 people. We hosted the Kansas Association of Career and Technical Education. FBLA leadership was in town, as well as the Kansas Seed Industry Association, and there was a plethora of baseball tournaments, baseball and softball tournaments that was happening in July. The biggest week, though, for the third quarter was September 22nd through the 28th, with a 74.9% occupancy for the week. That week, we hosted the Kansas Motor Carriers Association. We had several global campus meetings that were being held here in Manhattan. Flint Hills Regional Council, as well as the Kansas Republican Party, held their meeting here as well, which all of those organizations worked with our office. The best Friday of the third quarter was Friday, September the 6th, with that being an 84.5% occupancy. That was prior to the second football game of Bowling Green, in which we hosted. And the best Saturday was August 31st, which that was the kickoff for football season, with a 96.1% occupancy. Future business. We're pleased to announce that the Convention and Visitors Bureau is back to full staff. We've added to our staff George Kant as our convention sales manager. George actually is in Kansas City, actually today, working with groups to consider Manhattan as a meeting choice. You will see through this chart that we're comparing first quarter from 17, 18, and 19. The bottom of those charts, as you go all the way down through 17 and 18, shows the complete year. Obviously, on 2019, you're just able to see how the first three quarters have performed. As we book business, we're right on par with where we should. This book business is reflective of business that will be held in the next 2, 3, 4, and 5 years into the future. This chart, Generated Room Nights, shows those meetings that have been held here in Manhattan during 17, 18, and 19. You will again see through the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and the complete year for 17 and 18, and how we are comparing through the third quarter of 2019. Again, right on par, meetings ebb and flow that meet here in Manhattan. This chart, as we put this together, we've discovered that we have an error in our data. So I don't want you to go away thinking that 2017 that we had more attendees in Manhattan than what we did in 18 or 19. Just as I said in that other slide, that there are meetings ebb and flow, we had some duplication in our data that we have to correct. And so I think that we can, as we have looked at this data, we can confidently say that we had about 26 to 27,000 people attending Manhattan conferences in 2017. So we will get that corrected for you as we move forward. It's just difficult to go back after meetings have been held. Visit Manhattan website. Again, as we talk about social media and how people utilize our information, we live in a world where people are seeking that information instantly. You will see through the third quarter, our visits to Manhattan compare nicely with what they were for the total year in 17 and 18. Our page views also are going to be stacking up very nicely as well. What we are a bit concerned with, as you will see, and Commissioner McKee, you live in that world when how long do people stay on pages? We're a little concerned that what we are seeing is people aren't spending quite as much time on our pages as they have previously. We're not for sure what that is, if they're not finding what they are looking for, or if they just are faster readers than in the past. We also found that our top states with where people are seeking that information also coincides nicely with where our jet services, where we go into Illinois and to Texas. Kansas being the #1 state that's seeking information, followed by Missouri and Illinois, and also Texas is showing up as well. So again, we know that people are coming, and the #1 page that they're looking at is they're looking at our calendar events. Our social media platform, as we look at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, again, 17 and 18 are reflective of the entire year. You will see through the third quarter, we are way on par, again, showing that more and more people are using social media and those venues in which to gather information of what's happening in Manhattan. This is where Ben gets to be exciting again and gets to talk about when we looked at third quarter and fun events that happened that help benefit our community, and why one of the reasons why people come to town. We had events in July, and then September, we've highlighted September 21 and 22. So Ben, I don't know if you have additional information you'd like to share.
No, well, I will share one more event that I think has continued to grow, and even though there's a lot of local, one of the things that's not on here is the Just Try It triathlon that we have has grown year over year. A lot of kids, and we actually saw more kids from actually outside of just the Manhattan area coming in to do this, as well as adults. The adult race has really grown, and that was, I believe, the second week of August, right after the Brutus Shoe. The Little Apple Paddle was also July 13th. They attempted to set the Guinness Book of World Records at this, and I think missed it by 13 boats It was the longest chain of canoes and kayaks.
It's what they were trying to do, but due to high elevation, the Little Apple Paddle had to be moved into more of the Tuttle Puddle area, and so for whatever reasons, we've had a summer of Plan Bs.
No doubt. And then again, just the Gravel Duro continues to grow, as well as Conquer the Cons, that we cap it out every year and get great participation on that event as well.
We also dedicated Johnny Kaw, finally. We started to dedicate Johnny during National Tourism Week, and we had a little bit of inclement weather. We wanted to dedicate him at the end of June. We had a little bit of inclement weather, but by golly, we got him done on the 20th of September. And thank you, Commissioner, for your Commissioner Butler, for your lead on that with Friends of Johnny Kaw. It's countless people that have worked together and have donated time and money in which to make Johnny Caw now a place where people can go. It's a great photo opportunity for people. It tells the story of what Johnny Caw is. It's a great addition to City Park, which is really the heartbeat for our community with lots and lots of activities. We had, probably about 200 people in and out that evening during the dedication. We had a Johnny Caw look-alike contest. Due to the night and due to the change, we had one young gentleman that, as you can see from this photo, did a great job of really looking just like Johnny Caw. So that was really fun. Johnny Caw himself, and then the young lady that was the first card holder of Johnny Caw enlightened us by being able to cut the ribbon and let the fun begin. So again, thank you to all those partners that have made that to be a fun experience when you're in City Park. Then as we move forward, we have the Convention and Visitors Bureau held, if you wish, a listening post with a festivals task force. We held 3 meetings. Those dates were July 12th, October the 2nd, and the last one was really into the 4th quarter, but we needed to share that with us wrapping up the 3rd quarter presentation. It was just held this last Friday. Opportunities that were discussed were what is our purpose here as a festival? Is it going to be at the same time? What kind of music is it? Does it need to be music? Is it multiple small festivals held throughout the community? Is it country? Is it jazz? Is it rock? Is it Christian? Who pays for that? How do we help that come about? Some of the challenges that came out from those conversations is that of permanent festival facilities. If so, where is it? And then how do we grow a festival? And then much as we have talked about, we looked at what our busy weekend was when we had the Gravel Duro, Johnny Caw Festival, and the Conquer the Kanza. That all happened on the same weekend that the Little Apple Barbecue Festival happened out at the Midwest Dream Car Museum. So those folks that were interested in festivals have come together to have a conversation. I just received today information that people that have been a part of the festival task force are talking to one another that has music, food, and activities entwined. So they're trying to coordinate getting people again together to discuss how do you make that grow. I think the biggest takeaway from these festival task force meetings were, how do we grow our own? How do we grow an event that can attract outsiders in which to come and stay in our hotels? Another activity and meetings that we wanted to visit with you about this evening concerns our Sports Council. Manhattan Area Sports Council meets quarterly to discuss facility and local tournament planners, to discuss coordination of calendars and events. In addition to the quarterly masked meetings, the need for a sports task force was formed with the mission of evaluating the needs of our new sports offerings. The Sports Task Force met for 6 months beginning in January. Members were asked to be a part of this task force due to their current involvement in recreational sports. Gail Urban, who is a board member with the Chamber of Commerce, she served on the committee with that. Great discussion was held about the facility amongst the facilities task members who have experienced travel as they travel across the country for their respective sport that their children are in. They brought a wealth of information to the task force with their, as I said, with their respective sports in sports passion in mind. You can see from this chart that these were the sports that were represented, all of those which will fit nicely into Manhattan's offerings. The top priorities that came out of the task force meeting, the group felt these were key in order for our new offerings to be successful. Communication is multifaceted. New families, teams, coaches, tournament directors, the same message needs to go to multiple users. Concessions. There needs to be a policy that it needs to be set in regard to the food provider, if there's outside food allowed by team members. Each sport has a different need with food due to the length of their tournaments that they compete in. And scheduling. This will be a challenge with the new facilities as it will be used by the school district, Parks and Rec, programming, locals, as well as outside tournaments. Review of the priority as well as communication clearly needs to be clear in order for this policy to be successful. And then lastly is Wi-Fi. The top priority of all users of all sports and all of those facilities is a must. Public Wi-Fi is our way of life, to be connected at all times. Scheduling, communication, concessions, updates all need to have their Wi-Fi in order to keep the consumer and the sports participants up to date. Ben, I asked him, as he organizes races, regardless if they're running or biking or what they might be, how important Wi-Fi is. And he said that it's very important. He usually brings his own with him, but to have that offered would be even more successful. We wanted to share with you two pieces of information. This one is, that is reflected here, is a one-page sheet that highlights to the sports planners potentially what they might be interested in. Restaurants, attractions, things to do when they are down. It's a one-page communication sheet that is sent to the tournament organizers in a very cost-effective way. We send this piece to them electronically. The new sheet that you are looking at, that is still in a draft form, that's how come it's just in a light paper, is our marketing brochure that we are very excited about using. This sports marketing brochure has been created to entice the sports planners to choose Manhattan. Our newest facilities and updates are highlighted in this. It will be used at national and regional sports shows and with sports planners that are currently in our database. Manhattan will be attending a national sports ETA meeting in April of 2020 that will we have the good fortune of that being held in the Kansas City, Missouri area, where there will be over 1,000 attendees that are sports organizers that will be there in April. So our timing of being able to market and tell others about what Manhattan sports offerings is key as we continue to market Manhattan as a great place to play. Lastly, we look forward to providing you the updates on a quarterly basis. Our goal is always to provide you up-to-date information of our activities. In addition to the information that we have shared with you this evening, we also believe that it is important that in our final report that you have an understanding of the leads that we are working with, of our bookings, of rooms, of conferences that are going to be using 250 or more room nights. Also our marketing activity for the entire year. Some of those things you have seen, some of those things will be completed in time for our fourth quarter presentation, as well as sponsored events that we have committed to this year as well as into the future. With that, who might have questions for us? And again, we are always very, very appreciative of the support that you give to us at the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Questions that you might have for Ben or I.
So first, the way you laid out your data this time was a little bit different than what you've done in the past, and I like this.
Thank you.
I think it was a little bit more easy to digest comparatively to in the past, so my hot take, I like it like that. The only question I had was regarding the festival committee, because I haven't been a part of that. Obviously, most festivals, it's private equity and private capital that fund those. So when you say we, as a city, what role do we play other than moral support in making something like that happen?
Commissioner, that's a great question, and that was very, very evident in the conversation that was held at each of those meetings. It becomes evident that there has to be, we'll use Stampede as an example, that was a business.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that, the big question is, who does pay for that? You know, if there's a festival that comes in, somebody either sponsorships or somehow that event is going to happen. As you know, the Convention and Visitors Bureau had a very small sponsorship with Country Stampede. We were not the main sponsor. We see that we would have a similar small sponsorship in whatever those efforts might be, just as we have had small sponsorships and other activities that have happened across the community. So,
just out of curiosity, are there any potential private investors that are involved in those conversations?
Not at this point in time, no.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this task force idea is a great way to try to get some thoughts going. I haven't, taken part in that myself, but I've always wanted to see, like, the idea of small festivals. We've talked about this before. We've got Whoville and the giant Christmas tree and all that, and it seems like, the Thanksgiving to New Year's period could be looked at as a series of small festivals, and that's the time people don't seem to have a problem spending money. And so I think that could generate, tax dollars and help local business and things. And so maybe, look at things other countries and cities have done on that and see if we can capitalize on that. Because it's almost like Wamego owns the 4th of July. And I think we have the potential to own Christmas with the way things have been going with Whoville and the Festival of Lights and, the lighted parade and all those various things we do. If we could string those together into a series of events, I think you might be able to capitalize on that.
And Commissioner, also just to share one other comment that was made from those task force meetings, had several people that have had the opportunity to live in other communities that have been involved in community activities. And again, what was really stated over and over again, when you hold a festival that as volunteers, many of you helped with the Gravel Duro, that takes a commitment from us as a community to be committed to see that event, that festival to be successful. So it's not let somebody else come in and do it. It takes all of us working together.
Just to say that I'm happy to see such positive figures. It looks like, and of course it just goes back 4 or 5 years, but it looks like we're at an all-time high for
Yes.
participation and dollars and RevPAR and all of those things. And that is just wonderful, considering that we're down students and we're missing some Fort Riley folks right now. So having that is reassuring that, and I know from welcoming conferences and participants into the community last year how eager and enthusiastic people are to come to Manhattan. Some of them say, we used to rotate to Peak, Wichita, but I'm so glad we finally came here. And so that is just always such positive news that it feels good to be up in all those categories. And I'm glad also to see K-State's numbers included. I appreciate that. I want to see the whole picture for
Sure.
the community, and that really helps to see Global Campus. I'd like to see disc golf on here someday.
Oh, in art.
And I'm hopeful that we can have an 18-hole course. I think we've stumbled a couple of times on that, and I'm eager for us to find the right location where we can do that and do it well. And so that's just on our to-do list, and I think we need to put a higher priority on it instead of letting a year go by between each time we consider it. So I'm anxious to push on that. I'm just to say that I am encouraged by the numbers that you've brought to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen and Ben. I think the data is very reflective of people coming to our community and still wanting to engage. I don't know what it says about social media. It's very fickle. Everybody gets like a 2-second, they have a 3-second attention span. So I'm not sure that I would put too much emphasis on that. But I'm very optimistic about the sports task force. I think when we built the 2 rec centers, and even as we think about the other ball fields and everything that's going to come up, that was one of our revenue sources for operational costs. Because the sales tax was only going to pay for the buildings themselves and the expansion. The rest of it is still operation costs. As much as we want the community to be using it, it's very much for the community, but at the same time, we don't want them to pick up the tab twice. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those proposals are going to be in the future. And we had a really strong committee. Because of Gail Urban, we are able to have the 2 rec centers that we do, because of the work that her team has been doing for years. So this didn't happen overnight, yet we want all of those areas to be successful. And I know they make their schedules far ahead of time, so you're thinking long range, and we will facilitate as necessary. But I'm glad we're in that mix now as the place to be for any of those competitive plays. So thank you for your work, and I look forward to what the next few years bring for the rec centers as well.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things. Can you remind me in the convention center, when we build the new pieces out on the west side, about how many people can we accommodate in those breakout rooms?
Well, depending on the configuration, again, we'll be able to accommodate nicely 2 500 people conferences at the same time.
So
I don't have the square footage right in front of me.
if we have, I mean, I know our sweet spot is the 250
Correct.
conference. So that means we could have arguably a couple of those in at the same time from different events.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe a question for Eddie. At Annaberg or at Seco, do we have Wi-Fi or the ability to put in Wi-Fi in a reasonable way, or?
We don't, we do not currently have that at either one of those locations. We do in some locations in City Park. We were looking at increasing the range in City Park, and it was a $10,000 expense to do, and that still would not cover all of City Park. So Annaberg, Seco, substantially larger.
Do we have to have a carrier come in and do that for us? Is that part of the issue?
It would be a combination of a carrier as well as the infrastructure that our own IT would be able to provide. There would be a number of, I don't know the proper terminology, but receivers and antennas that would be required. Each one of those has about a 200-foot range, so it's just how extensive of coverage you'd want to have.
Yeah.
In years past, we had it strictly at City Park Pool. We'd moved that over to the ice rink, and then we also had it, and we will be having it as Johnny Call gets completed in that immediate Johnny Call area. So it's inconsistent as what we've had in the past, so tightening up closer than that 200-foot range would help. But again, $10,000 would do a portion of City Park. If you're looking at something in Annaberg, you'd be looking at those kind of costs or greater.
Okay, thanks. On the festival task force, I sat in on, I think, the first two. Did we ever get any retail businessmen in there? My argument, I think, in the beginning was that I think the impact on the hotels was something, but not very much, and I think over time, that gap would even be closed. It was essentially for 3 days of 1 week, and I think the argument there was that a lot of people didn't come because they thought the Stampede would fill up all the rooms.
Right.
So, I mean, the data shows that we're doing fine right now. So, the retail side of this, I mean, the folks that went for ice or drinks or whatever it was, the lawn chairs that they might get to go out to the Stampede, there's an impact there. That's why I was wondering if the retailers had a seat at the table here to.
Certainly, and as you know, the task force was open to anyone that was of interest. And the first meeting, there was a retailer that attended, and I'd have to go back in our records to see if they were able to continue. Regardless if those folks had attended or not, everyone was sent the notes from them, and I just haven't had time to get the third and final notes typed up to send out to everyone.
We might want to send it to DMI and Aggieville and.
Sure.
I mean, I know Gina was on the distribution. but,
Sure.
When we started, maybe this is 2 years ago, when we had the young professionals request a waiver for how we did alcohol down on Blue Earth, was that mentioned as an obstacle for where we might want to do this?
Yes, the second meeting, there was some discussion about some of the city ordinances possibly need to be adjusted or at least looked at during a special event time. Again, to the thought of if you had a festival that was downtown, also had activities in Aggieville, you don't want people just to be able to walk in open containers, but within those regions, how do we look at that? And I think certainly as planners of activities, they are cognizant of that and really want to make it so it's a user-friendly, and certainly I think you as our community leaders are listening to that, so it's not an obstacle, but rather how do you make it so it's feasible for all?
When we were talking about fixed facilities, because part of the issue with the Stampede was setting up, tearing down, and all the mobile infrastructure that has to be out there, not to include the electronics. So beyond that, we have parking restraints in almost every venue inside the city I can think of.
Right.
There's just not a lot of places to put cars that don't include lining the streets, so that has to be part of our calculus too, I think, and that kind of limits. We've looked at the Tuttle Creek below the dam again. Got to negotiate some rental rates with the Corps of Engineers, but because that was another expense of the Stampede.
Right.
Is there any kind of emerging consensus on this thing yet, or?
The consensus is facilities would be needed. If so, where at and who pays for them? How's it maintained? Obviously, it's just like when we were looking at building that conference center. It's not good when the conference center is empty. It's not good days. We wouldn't have good numbers if we are not doing our job of bringing people into our communities to stay in our hotels, to shop and to dine, because that affects the bottom line. So I think that it's too early to tell what that silver bullet is. If it's facilities, a different kind of facility that would come to light, it's too early at this point in time to say what that might be.
To Commissioner Butler's point, if we don't have kind of something to test pretty soon, then we'll kind of miss, because you have to do this well in advance, obviously, to
Right.
get it started. So, just let us know what kind of, as you evolve, what kind of help you need.
Certainly.
The other thing you and I have talked about, and I apologize in advance, but can you just go on our our website and show us the calendar? I don't know if,
Can I do that? Can I go into our,
maybe someone else will have to drive here for a minute, I don't know.
got it. You're testing my skills now.
When I talked to Marcia down at the bike race, this is one of the things we were talking about is, because when one of the things I was gonna talk with,
Here's our calendar.
I was having a hard time finding it on this website.
Let's look at-
Where did you start?
Here's our front page. So,
Is that the Chamber of Commerce page, or what?
no, this is Visit Manhattan. So, which you can also get to us through the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce, but you're visiting Manhattan, we want you to come to
So
our side first.
You have to have it, if you put in Manhattan, for example, Manhattan, Kansas, you would have to then find Visit Manhattan on there.
Yeah, there's a variety of ways that you can get to us.
Can you go in through the chamber, just so I can see that? 'Cause when I was looking for that event, I finally gave up and went to Channel 7.
They're good partners of us. Here's our website.
And then, if you wanted to see a calendar,
You could go to, you probably would go to Chamber Events, probably is what you went to, but that's a different calendar.
And I think as I was telling you, in Channel 7, you can have an overall calendar, you can have one for sports, you can have one for art.
Right. Commissioner, Mayor, you're hitting that nail on the head. Next year, we are getting a new website. It takes about 9 months for that to be created, but we know that the number one things people look at on our website is that calendar. We also know that that calendar needs to be extremely user-friendly. And we'll use Channel 27 as a great example, a great partner. A lot of people go to different sources in which to get their calendar of information. We hope that they are coming to us to see what's happening in our community, but just as they are coming to us, we also are looking to see what have we missed. And so it's very important that our calendars now, you're not the first person to say, I get frustrated when I'm trying to look at that. And so we wish that we could make that correction on our side on Visit Manhattan tomorrow. Unfortunately, when you create new websites, it takes longer than that. So we listen to you very much.
Yeah, I'd just like to see kind of that big button up there on events.
Yes.
And it, whether you go in through the chamber or whatever you enter through, that ought to be prominent so that you can find it easily. 'Cause
Right.
I agree with you. I think people coming here or people who are here and looking for things to do, man, that's a big impact.
Absolutely. This is what they do when they click on our event calendar, and then they go to this. And it sometimes if you're in a hurry, it needs to be more user-friendly.
Yeah,
Yep.
all right.
Just other than to say that I just think it's important to compliment the community and the citizens here for the volunteer work they do with the events that we have. Mayor Dodson is president of Rotary, Manhattan Rotary, and I don't know about Kanza, but I know that a number of Rotary members participate, volunteer for a couple hour shifts, and that's just a piece of it. You have people who volunteer all day, and so it takes all of us to pull these off, and I think our community really responds to those and steps forward.
It's
So
very true.
Hooray for all of us that is what our community's all about.
Couldn't agree more.
Good. Any comment from anyone in the audience on this issue? Anyone like to make any comment at all? All right, well, thanks very much. We really appreciate
Thank
all
you.
the hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the second item is combined smoking and e-cigarette ordinances, and are you coming? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Tonight we're going to be having a discussion item on the combined smoking and e-cigarette ordinance. And then we're hoping for some feedback from you all on some talking points, discussion points, and then coming back at a later date for a vote from the City Commission to approve the ordinance. I'm going to start tonight with just a little history, a long history of how we got to where we are today. Back in 2008, we received a petition and referendum from the voters of the City of Manhattan to put on the ballot a smoking ordinance, a no smoking ordinance that would be citywide. When that petition was received, the City Commission approved a resolution that put that on the ballot for the November 4th general election in 2008, and it passed by the citizens. Per state statute, the governing body cannot repeal or amend that ordinance for 10 years after it goes into effect, and it went into effect on January 4th, 2009. Shortly after the 2008 citizen referendum process, the state did pass the Kansas Indoor Clean Air Act related to smoking indoors in public places and places of employment. There are some differences between our local ordinance that was passed first and the state ordinance. Ours, in a few areas, is a little bit more strict. For example, the state passed a law about smoking within 10 feet of an access point, where ours went to 20 feet. The state allowed for up to 10% of hotels and motels to have smoking rooms, where ours were all hotels had to be smoke-free. So there were some areas and provisions within our ordinance that were a little bit more strict. E-cigarettes came about, in 2015, 2016, and maybe even before then. We got legal opinions from not only our city attorney's office, but the Kansas Attorney General, that e-cigarettes and smoking were not the same thing. They had to be treated differently. So e-cigarettes did not fall under our no smoking ordinance that was passed in 2008. And of course, we couldn't amend our 2008 ordinance for 10 years. So what we decided as a city commission back in 2016 was to adopt a separate e-cigarette ordinance that would prohibit it in public places and places of employment. It pretty much mirrored the 2008 ordinance. There are a little bit of differences just from legal perspectives that we wanted to clean up, but for the most part, it was treated the same, and some of those differences we'll discuss later today. So as of January 4th, 2019, we can amend or repeal that ordinance that was passed in 2008, and the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition requested the City Commission combine the two ordinances and then make some changes to clear up some of those ambiguities and differences. I've put up here just, this was in your packet, the letter from the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition, but it's a list of their requests for the City Commission to consider and adopt as a part of this combined ordinance. The first one, of course, was to combine those and maintain some of those stricter restrictions from the smoking ordinance. They wanted to retain the fine structure from the smoking ordinance, which is different than the state law. We'll get to a slide on that here later. They wanted to allow for a warning on the first violation. You'll notice in the draft ordinance that's not within there. That's not something that we can include, and we've talked to the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition about that because that's, an enforcement discretion of Riley County Police Department who's enforcing that ordinance. It's not something necessarily you would put as a provision. We're going to talk about access point language that we cleared up in the e-cigarette ordinance, and then addressing Parks and Rec because there are some ambiguities within the smoking ordinance on where in Parks and Rec facilities you can smoke. And then they wanted us to tackle smoking in vape stores and having them be exempt current vape stores, which are currently allowed to use e-cigarettes within their stores, but then not allow smoking or vaping in any new retail store that comes up in the future. We did have so our city attorney's office worked to create a draft ordinance that's in front of you tonight. And we had a public meeting and invited interested stakeholders to the meeting just to go through the draft ordinance, answer any questions. The meeting went, fairly well. Most of the questions were just on the way certain provisions were phrased and how those provisions, what they meant. As you can see here, there's a long list of not only, the school district, the health department, the chamber, RCPD, but also existing owners and managers of e-cigarette stores and tobacco stores. We'll get to a slide later, but there was opposition voiced from owners and managers of the e-cigarette stores to not allow or prohibit use of e-cigarettes in their retail stores. From a few of those that were in attendance. We did bring up, I did bring up to those stakeholders that were in attendance at the public meeting, just to let them know that this ordinance does not address age. There are a lot of cities in Kansas who have increased the age to purchase e-cigarettes to 21, as well as smoking. That's not something that was requested by the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition or is addressed in this draft. Some other cities in Kansas, I believe, and across the country have also pushed to ban flavored e-cigarettes and vaping, and that is not addressed in this draft ordinance either. And I did not get any feedback from those stakeholders to include or advocate for any of that. So I'm just going to briefly go through an overview of the draft ordinance. Most of it is pretty much the same. We're just clearing up a lot of those ambiguities, definitions, legal terms, and things like that. But for the most part, still within an enclosed area, public place, places of employment, you're not going to be allowed to smoke or use e-cigarettes. So in the ordinance, we define public places. We also go into some other enclosed areas, such as taxis, transportation network vehicles would be an Uber or a Lyft. We talk about common areas within, residential, private buildings, such as, restrooms and lobbies and hallways. Those are considered enclosed areas as well. And then, of course, any place of employment. Smoking and the use of e-cigarettes will also be prohibited in non-enclosed areas. We talk about access points, so that could be a front door, a back door, a window to any enclosed building or facility. The state says that you can't smoke within 10 feet. We're keeping consistent with the 2008 ordinance that says you wouldn't be able to smoke or use e-cigarettes within 20 feet of any access points. One of the problems with the 2008 ordinance was they used the term entrance. So while you wouldn't be able to necessarily smoke in front of an entrance, one could argue that you could possibly smoke next to a window or a back door or something like that. So we've cleared that up to mirror the state law. Another area that was kind of ambiguity because of that entrance terminology was these, if you're at a food establishment or a drinking establishment and they have a back patio, that is not necessarily an enclosed area, it's open space, but it's enclosed in a way that you're asking people to open to the public to come in and eat outside. That would be considered an area that you wouldn't be able to smoke or use an e-cigarette. We threw in city-owned parking garages. We own one currently and are in the process of designing another. So it doesn't necessarily fall in front of an enclosed area because of the way that the levels are built. And then we address outdoor parks and recreation facilities, and we go into within the parcel boundaries of those areas is where it's going to be prohibited to smoke or use e-cigarettes. And that's where I'll jump into the parks and recreation discussion. These are the areas where you can't currently smoke based on the 2008-2009 ordinance that was passed by the citizens. And as you can see, it lists a lot of specific areas, but it doesn't necessarily get into, there's ambiguity about if you can't smoke in front of a playground, can you smoke right next to the playground? Where does the playground end? 20 feet away from the playground. So it was pretty difficult for, RCPD and us to really define and enforce that. So in 2016, we wanted to make it consistent with the smoking ordinance because we knew we were going to come back at a later date and combine these. So we kind of, used the 20-foot radius rule to really kind of further define that. And we listed a few of those areas that were in the 2008 ordinance. But when the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition gave this request, what we did was we worked with Parks and Recreation staff to figure out where they stood. We went to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board and got their feedback and opinion, and their consensus from the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and Parks and Rec staff was to prohibit smoking and the use of e-cigarettes or vaping in all outdoor parks and recreation areas. And that would be within the entire parcel of those areas, and it would include things like trails, pools, and cemeteries. To give an example, I brought up just the GIS map of Annenberg Park as a good example. You can see vaguely the green line that goes within our parcel boundary of that park that we own. And you wouldn't be able to smoke, based on this draft ordinance, you wouldn't be able to smoke or use an e-cigarette within any of that area. So you wouldn't be able to do it in the parking lot. You wouldn't be able to do it in the bleachers or off to the side while activity is going on, or by the lake or anything like that. So the ordinance does go to that extent of the whole parcel boundary, and that was the recommendation of of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and city staff. In 2008, similar to the state law, we required proprietors or managers of these public places of employment to post no smoking signs in their facility to let the public know that it wasn't allowed. In 2016, when we did the e-cigarette ordinance, we did not include that provision. That's led to some confusion among members of the public. Why is there? It says that I can't smoke, but there isn't a no e-cigarette or vaping sign, so it's hard for individuals to enforce that, or at least understand that. So this ordinance is going to require any proprietor or manager of a public place or place of employment to either post the international no smoking sign as well as post a no e-cigarette or vaping sign. You could also post one sign that covers both of them, and that this is consistent with the state law. So the state law does now require that you post the international no smoking symbol. So it would be inconsistent of us to not mirror the state law and require that same posting of e-cigarettes. So this is something that is within the draft ordinance and a requirement.
Which one is the international one that you have there?
Generally, it would be, this is considered, I guess, the international no
international,
smoking.
so it
But
applies.
the state doesn't obviously have a law regarding e-cigarettes in public places yet. So there isn't really any feedback from the state on what to use. These are just some examples I pulled from the internet. Fines, as you recall, the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition did request that we use the stricter fine structure from our current ordinance, so I have that right here. And you will notice that it is different. It's different from the state law, and it's different from the draft ordinance that's in front of you today. We wanted to mirror the state law. The commission does have, of course, the ability to keep what's from the current ordinance. This one, it broke it down by not only the user, but a different fine structure for the owner or manager of a public place or place of employment. As you can see, it was 3 tiers of 3 violations within a given year and how that fine structure worked if you violated the ordinance. The current ordinance talks about no less than, so it would technically be a minimum of $50 fine for a violation, or $100 for an owner or manager that would violate. And then moving forward, the state law and what's in the draft ordinance discusses not exceeding $100 for the first violation, not exceeding $200 for the second violation, and not exceeding $500 for the third violation. And that would be, again, within a given year. So currently, that's how it is in the draft ordinance. If the commission wants to keep it stricter, we certainly can.
What is the direction for how much it actually is, if it's not to exceed? Who sets a lesser amount?
I believe that would be at the municipal judge's discretion
judge?
when they're prosecuting that.
Is the 100, is the 100 for the owner and the manager?
Yes, so in the draft ordinance and as it's written in the state law, both the user who's either smoking or using an e-cigarette or the manager would be subject to the same fine structure.
Does that need to be stated, or is it just to get?
It is stated in the draft
in the-
ordinance.
I must have missed that thing.
Yeah, I just didn't have enough room up here. Lastly, another discussion point that we're wanting feedback from the city commission tonight on is whether to allow or prohibit smoking and vaping in retail tobacco or e-cigarette stores. In 2008, our ordinance that was passed through the petition referendum process prohibited smoking in retail tobacco stores. That's a provision that is more strict than the state law. The state law does allow smoking within retail tobacco stores. I'm sure other cities have prohibited that, like the city of Manhattan. At the time in 2008, I believe we had one retail tobacco store in existence at the time. So they were not allowed to allow their patrons to smoke in their store anymore. Flash forward in 2016, we had about 3 e-cigarette vaping stores in town at that time in operation. and the city commission passed an ordinance that would allow or exempt, e-cigarette stores from the ordinance, so it would allow them to use e-cigarettes or vape within their stores. In the draft ordinance that's in front of you tonight, we are we recommend consistent treatment. So right now, we have two very similar stores, businesses that are being treated inconsistently or different. So we would recommend that, one, we treat them consistently in the draft right now, because the 2008 was the more stricter one. We drafted it in a way that right now it would be prohibited for both a smoking and an e-cigarette store to not be able to use those products in those stores.
How many stores do we have now? It was 3 at that
I
time.
believe we have 4 now, 4 locations in Manhattan. Before this, with the stakeholder meeting, I reached out to those 4 owners and managers, as well as the owner of the manager, I guess, of the retail tobacco store in town, just to let them know about that. And then that was one of the things that we heard at the stakeholder meeting, was that currently it's allowed, and they opposed prohibiting that moving forward. With that, I don't know if you want public comment first, or if you want to go through some of these discussion items that we've posed for today.
Yeah, I think we'll do a quick review up here, and then we'll go to the public.
Okay.
And then come back. But one of the questions that I'm not sure you answered when you mentioned age, does the state of Kansas have a restriction on who you can sell cigarettes to? I know many states do. You have to be either 18 or 21 to buy cigarettes.
I believe the state law is 18, and but there are cities who have increased that to 21. And Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that got challenged, and the state maybe said that was allowable for cities to actually increase that age.
It was challenged in the court system, and the courts upheld the city's ability to raise the purchase age from 18 to 21.
But if we state nothing,
It would be
state
18.
law still applies at 18, is that right?
Yes, and we don't have a local city ordinance that regulates the sale. We rely on the state law.
And is that true for e-cigarettes as well,
Yes.
18? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that the RCPD has something to,
Yeah, it's
Put
not
their
it's
teeth
not that
in
we're
yours.
ignoring it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
we're deferring to state law on that.
yeah, all right, good. You,
I had a question about the patios and outdoor. So to make sure that I understand, if I'm at, like, let's say Yard Bar, and I'm on the patio, under how the ordinance is drafted currently, I would not be able to smoke on that patio, correct?
The way that the draft ordinance is written, or
What
the
we're talking-
current ordinance
yeah.
that's in effect right now?
The way that the draft ordinance is written.
So the draft ordinance would prohibit you from being on the patio of Yard Bar and smoking.
So was there any, to me, that seems a little bit problematic, because, I mean, at least in that scenario, what you're gonna do is just push people to the sidewalk and smoke. So at least I can avoid them on the patio, but I can't on the sidewalk. So was there a discussion about that at all?
Well, you would maybe not necessarily be pushing them to the sidewalk, because you still wouldn't be able to smoke within 20 feet of any access point to that establishment.
So essentially, essentially in a place like Aggieville, we're pretty much banning smoking.
I think within the Aggieville district, there are certainly areas that are 20 feet away. You may have to walk, but,
in one of your descriptions, though, you have the ratio of open overhead space to the dimension of the walls, so it has to equal 30%, right?
that's the definition of enclosed area.
Yeah, so if it's more than that, it's then open.
Yes.
And so some of these patio spaces, it seems to me, could certainly be declared open.
Just to clarify, there's a specific exemption in the draft ordinance for the patios, regardless of the fact that they are not enclosed by the definition. The reason that's in there is under the current law that's in effect, the Smoking Initiative and Referendum Ordinance, that law prohibits smoking within 20 feet of an entrance. And so for many patios, not all, it depends on the way it's set up, the first 20 feet of the patio have been no smoking anyway for the last 10 years.
I see.
And it's something that the commission can change, but the request was to basically eliminate smoking on the full patio, because the first 20 feet have no smoking if they're within 20 feet within an entrance.
I guess I was thinking these rooftop areas and things like that, not patios in the conventional sense of the entry to a structure, so. Is that,
Okay, yeah, that just, guess I'll think about that one. Maybe I'm being closed-minded and only thinking about one space, but when I think about somewhere like Aggieville, I don't know how I would avoid someone smoking in that case. My other question was, in terms of flavors, have there been any bills filed yet, or any indication from the governor's office that they were gonna act on the ban of flavored vapes?
I haven't seen anything. I know there's been discussion that it would be taken up this coming legislative session, but I don't really know to what extent.
If they didn't pick it up this legislative, I mean, our state historically doesn't act timely or decisively on many issues. If they didn't pick it up, would we be able to amend this ordinance in the future to ban flavored vaping if we wanted to?
That's gonna be a really hard thing for the city to do, because the way that those laws are written on the state or federal level, really it should be a federal law, because what they're gonna say is that a flavor can't be sold within the jurisdiction of the United States. To say that within the city of Manhattan, who is responsible if it's being purchased off the internet? Can it not be purchased or sold here? So you have what's called an interstate commerce issue under the Constitution if you regulate the sale of things that can cross jurisdictions and state lines. And that's why we would have difficulty as a city banning the sale of a particular type of vape. It's more of a state or federal issue. That doesn't mean that what Topeka did is they say you can't sell it to an individual if you're an establishment located in the city, which doesn't have the same interstate commerce violation. That's saying that nobody can purchase it within the city of Manhattan. I know it's kind of confusing, but if you think of it that way, that's why we don't have the same authority to ban flavors that we would to prohibit a local establishment from selling them in their stores.
Okay.
And Katie, I don't, since this ordinance relates to the use or smoking or using e-cigarettes, would we go with a separate ordinance
Yes.
regarding the sale?
Yes.
So it wouldn't be necessarily amending this ordinance, but coming back with a separate one?
No, if the commission wanted to pursue that, we actually have a reserved article after this one, just an empty article of provisions, and that's where we would regulate the sale, separate from this ordinance.
Okay, that's all I had.
That's just a logistic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think sorry.
go ahead.
Okay, this is, I'm glad we are discussing it now because it's been in the news so much, but we were discussing it even before it was in the news. I think we're one of those few communities, because the voters brought us the petition, that it was passed in 2008, and we were able to put into something in place in 2009. And at that time, I remember there was a lot of discussion by businesses thinking that it was somehow going to decrease revenue, or people were not going to come into their establishments because now they can't smoke. When actually it benefited them, because now a lot more families were going to their establishments. And I wanted to know, I think Kansas State University banned it completely, even within the 20 feet. Is that right? Or
Yeah,
on
they-
their campus?
The university passed a campus-wide resolution, and they are actually tobacco-free and vape-free. And so the tobacco would include not only smoking, but like chewing tobacco
Right.
or smokeless
And not
tobacco.
even 20 feet? Not
Yeah,
on
I believe
campus
it's
at all?
within the
Confines of
the boundaries of campus. I don't know if they designated any certain areas that people could go. I'd have to talk to K-State about that.
I'm not sure that
But
they
they
did.
did pass that resolution.
Yeah, so I just wanted to be clear that this is becoming more the normal than the anomaly, where we are taking more ordinances or trying to make it more, I guess, prohibit the secondhand smoke and anything else that might be with nicotine in it. I know Juul is being sued in Olathe, I believe, and in some other cities because of the age and because of the flavored e-cigarettes, there's more health hazards for young people. It has actually increased within that demographic. So when we discuss age being 21, I don't know how we can implement something like that, but that is something that I would be interested in seeing. I know we can't do anything about flavored cigarettes, so I don't mind leaving that alone. I read, I think, of the signage piece. You said there wasn't anything in the state, but I think from everything I've read, that's probably good to just have one sign like that. And I would imagine there would have to be some kind of an education process for the establishments to have put that same signature signage on all of their
So right
areas.
now, the ordinance says that you could, most establishments or places should have this already. So you can, if you want, add another. Or you would also be allowed to remove this one and then add a combined one. But yeah, that, we would need to educate the public and businesses that this requirement would be in effect.
Okay. I'm glad we're updating it, like I said, and I think it's going to be better for our businesses and our communities. There's just been so much health hazards happening with e-cigarettes that I didn't even imagine till everything else started. The research showed more and more of it as being more addictive. Can you tell me, and maybe RCPD Dennis can tell me a little bit more, since we had the ordinance in place for no smoking, how many citations had we had to give since within that 10-year period? Has there, I don't know what the enforcement rate has been, or did everybody just stop smoking and we didn't have a problem?
I don't know off the top of my hand for the previous few years, but I do recall in 2016 when we considered the e-cigarette ordinance, the prior 2 years we hadn't had any smoking violations that were processed.
So it's become normal, is what I'm thinking, unless...
Yeah, and it, the ordinance does state that it's on the proprietor to enforce this ordinance, so with the signage, or if someone's in their facility, it's their responsibility to tell that individual that they're violating the ordinance.
Okay. Because that's what I want to see, that actually they're not being rewarded, but we actually changed behavior, is what I'm seeing. So they can still smoke at home or wherever in private settings. As far as keeping the establishments that already have it smoking within their own establishment, you said we have 4 right now? 4 vaping,
Yes.
vape bars, I guess, is what it is, right? And we only have 1, no,
We have a retail tobacco store
Yeah.
in town, and then we have, based on how it's defined in the ordinance, we have 4 retail e-cigarette stores or vaping stores where they sell products for
Right.
e-cigarettes and vaping, in which those establishments currently are allowed to use that product, e-cigarettes or vaping, within those establishments.
I don't mind keeping it consistent between the two. I don't think, I'm not really in favor of banning smoking within the establishment of where they're selling it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so right now, though, we have, the smoking ordinance says that you can't smoke in a retail tobacco store, whereas this one says, whereas our e-cigarette ordinance says you can vape in an e-cigarette store. So what we want from a consistency standpoint is to allow both of those stores to use that product within them, or not allow both of those stores to use those. So that's the feedback that we're looking at. The Flint Hills Wellness Coalition did, in their request, ask that we grandfather, for lack of a better term, the existing stores and then not allow new ones. As we put in the memo, there is some inconsistencies with that from a competition standpoint, that would be very difficult to put into an ordinance. So that's why city administration is recommending treating them consistently and looking to the city commission to choose whether to allow or prohibit it within those facilities.
I thought we had already grandfathered it in and we weren't going to have any more new establishments.
So that was discussed back in 2016, but there wasn't a majority of commissioners who were in favor of that. So the ordinance that passed in 2016, it just exempts e-cigarette stores, which it would allow currently for a new one to open up.
I think I was the one who wanted them grandfathered in.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember now. Yes, I still want just the grandfathering in and not new ones. Because one thing we want to do is not, if people are addicted or if there's more health concerns surrounding this area, that's probably where it's going to go eventually, is what I'm thinking. So if I believe I was the one who had wanted to grandfather those in, and I think I'm still in favor of that. Let's see, how many? Do you know how many communities in the state of Kansas have also banned or have something in place, an ordinance in place for e-cigarettes? Are we one of the first few
At the time in
communities, or-
2016, there were about 10. I would assume there are more now. And that was 10 larger cities, similar to our size. And then I believe from a parks standpoint, there have been about 30 communities or more in Kansas that have prohibited use within parks and recreation outdoor areas in some capacity.
And do e-cigarettes have a warning sign like cigarettes do, that this is hazardous to their health or anything to that effect?
I do not know.
Okay. Oh, somebody has
Someone from the health
somebody's going to
department
tell
might
us
know,
about
or,
that.
yeah,
Okay.
from the establishments.
And that was my question. Okay, I think those are just my concerns. Like I said, I'm glad we're discussing this because I'm hearing more and more of it, and it seems to be more drastic and more addictive in young kids because the flavor, basically, it makes it more enticing and it doesn't feel as like a cigarette. It doesn't feel like it's harsh or nicotine, or it doesn't feel as harmful to the body, so it's just more addictive. And we are seeing more deaths, even in the state of Kansas, and certainly we want to be more proactive. And I think this community has always been proactive in these meetings when it comes to nicotine, tobacco, alcohol, whatever it might be. And I'm glad we were able to partner up with several of our organizations here, but it always falls on RCPD to enforce it. So I hope this is something that they feel comfortable enforcing. Ultimately, it's no point in having an ordinance that can't be enforced, and it seems like we made some headway with the smoking ordinance, and hopefully the same with the e-cigarette ordinance as well.
Let's go ahead and hear from the public at this time. So I'm not sure everybody is familiar with the rules, but I'll just state them again. Basically, everyone who wants to talk can come forward, and you just sign in, put your name, tell us your name and address, and indicate that also on the piece of paper. And then everybody gets 5 minutes, and that's done in order for as many people who wish to talk to have an opportunity. You'll get a prior, at the 4-minute, 30-second mark, you get a beep, and then get another beep at the 5-minute point.
My name's Travis Kirby. I'm the owner of Juicy's Vapor Lounge. My son started this company 6 years ago in Oklahoma, and we've grew it to 65 employees. I just want to come and talk to you today. I'm glad a lot of you have mentioned some of the things that are in the news because it's what's concerning me most. I'm more passionate about this because my son started the company, so it means a lot to me. We've helped thousands of people quit smoking over the last 6 years that we've been in business. And e-cigarettes have got a bad review on this. If you've researched it enough, you know the CDC has already came out and said the biggest majority of these cases are from black market THC cartridges that are being sold on the street. That's caused the lung issues and all the health problems. One of my concerns is with the underage vaping, and I think that's the census of the whole community. And I just want to tell you what we do at Juicy's to keep this from happening. Everybody walks in our store has to have an ID, and you have to produce it every time, even if you're in there 10 times a day. And you're scanned into our system. Your account comes up on our computer. We can see your last 5 purchases, and we even use this in curbing underage people or 18-year-olds maybe that are still in high school coming in and buying for their buddies. If we see they're buying way more than what they should be using, we suspect them to be buying for underage, we ban them from the store. Ban them from all juices. Your comment on the flavoring. This is the biggest scam that's going on in this industry right now, and it's Big Tobacco that's put this out. Because they know if they can get the flavoring banned, they can shut down small business, and Big Tobacco will own the industry again. What's caused this epidemic in underage vaping is high nicotine salts. It came out 2 years ago, and if you do your research, you'll realize that that is when teenage vaping skyrocketed. And what it is nic salts came into the market, and it was these companies were able to put high levels of nicotine in e-liquid juice. And that's what the kids are after. It's not the flavors. Juul is the biggest company out there. Their flavors aren't that good. But what they have is a device that delivers a good hit of vape with high nicotine. And then the kids like the buzz. So my biggest issue, I wanted to field any questions from anybody. I've been in this industry 6 years. Like I said, my son started this. We built it to 17 stores. We've recently closed 3 because of all the bad publicity that we've got. It's hurt us, you know. But I just wanted to come before you, and I want to clarify what you're hearing in the news is what Big Tobacco is putting out there. They have 80 lobbyists around this nation lobbying these states to ban flavors, because they know if they ban the flavors, it's game over for small business, and they'll own the market again, and that's what they're after. Do any of you have any questions for me? As far as the ordinance goes, I'm one and believes if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. My employees vape in the store. We have customers that test different juices that we carry in the store. And this is what we've done from the beginning. If e-cigarettes are so bad for everybody, the way the fake news media has put it out there, then why aren't my employees the first ones in the hospital? They all vape, they handle e-liquid juice all day long. They should be the first one in the hospital, and they're not. We've never had any issues whatsoever. And to my knowledge, I don't know that any of our customers have had any issues. But like I said, this whole thing has got stirred up from THC cartridges that are being sold on the street. That was my beaver.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else, please?
Good evening. My name is Antonio Savarino. I'm the president of Kansas Vapors Association, a group that deals with advocacy for the vaping community here in Kansas. Actually, my company is also the ones that sued the city of Topeka over the age restriction that they added a couple years ago. I have 2 locations here in Manhattan and 1 in Junction City. And the last 5 years, we have been able to vape in our locations. We all know that. My customers can come in and try flavors, which is very important, and them being able to stay off of stinkies, we call them, the cigarettes, for years. We've watched people from the day we opened till now, still vaping, still not on cigarettes. To reiterate what Travis said, me and him work together on stopping youth use here in the area. We actually communicate and to make sure that kids are not going from his store to my stores and buying product. We don't want 18-year-olds. We don't sell Juul products. Juul is what's being sued by Olathe. We don't even sell those products in my locations. We ask that you leave this product alone. Dr. Gottlieb, the ex-commissioner of FDA, actually said, if you could switch every adult smoker to e-cigarettes, you would have a major health impact. This is the commissioner of the FDA. Any questions?
Thanks very much, appreciate it. Anyone else, please?
Mayor Dodson, Commissioners, my name's Debbie Nuss. I live at 2404 Sumac, and I am the current chair of the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition, the group that sent you the letter back in January that started this whole process. And I just want to say, first of all, that we are very appreciative of the work that city staff did in preparing the draft of the ordinance that's before you. They worked hard to address the issues that we raised in our letter. Also educated us about some of the things that we asked for that might not work well. And at the stakeholders meeting, we appreciated the opportunity to be able to talk through those issues. And so we do support the ordinance in its current form. We did, as you noticed in our letter, suggest that current businesses be allowed to continue, but that no new businesses be allowed to open. But if that's problematic, then we do support the more restrictive component of the draft that's before you. In terms of the issue related to age, there are efforts afoot that we do think that state and federal law can address those, as well as prohibiting vaping entirely. And so we're willing to step back and let those run their course. We also appreciated the Parks and Rec Board's willingness to take a hard look at this issue and address the issue in terms of whether or not smoking and vaping should be allowed in city property, because that has been a confusing issue the past 10 years. I also want to say that I and others were involved when the ordinance was passed 10 years ago, and it has worked well for our community. Businesses, sky didn't fall. Businesses apparently didn't close because of it, and we think that that would be the case again, except for clearly the businesses that is their business. Restaurants and bars, their business wasn't selling cigarettes. It wasn't selling those particular products. So they continued to be able to do business for their intended purposes, and restricting smoking didn't have a negative impact on them. So again, want to thank city staff for their efforts and for communicating with us about it, and for you being willing to address the issue again.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. James Gardner, 2612 Marquee Hill Road. I'm not living in the city, I'm in the county, but my office is in the city. Some of these things that have been happening remind me of when the tobacco industry decided to have filters on their cigarettes, and how it was so much more healthy for you to use filtered cigarettes. When I was in medical school, it was the first time that any scientific data had come forth indicating emphysema and lung cancer being associated very strongly with tobacco. Since then, there's been lots and lots more research, but it's what, 30 or 40 years sometimes. Doctors used to smoke a lot, and the tobacco industry would use them. The vaping thing's kind of new, and I look at it as a little similar. If you've got nicotine in the vaping cigarette to take people off of tobacco, it's a similar idea than to have a filter. nicotine itself has many bad effects and its own little list of some cancer issues, coronary artery disease. And the last time I was here, I mentioned about a little study that I read one time of tobacco, well, nicotine issues, where they were, some Indian cardiologists did some arteriograms of the coronary arteries and then had them take their nicotine and the arteries spasmed. Well, it wasn't a real scientific study, but it was very interesting to read. I just mentioned I'm the president-elect of the the Riley County Medical Society, and I checked with our president, and we certainly endorse what the city commission is planning to do. And I think the more restrictive in a way it is, the simpler it is for people to recognize this terrible addictive issue for its good and not to perpetuate the addiction. There's lots of different ways to try to do that. I've been very impressed with how many patients I've had over the years that have quit smoking. And I think some of the restrictive aspects was probably educational information to them. But at any rate, I'd like to mention that. And I was very impressed with how much you folks have read about this and seem to know about it. It's very impressive.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shanika Rosen with the Riley County Health Department, and I serve as the Chronic Disease Risk Reduction Coordinator. I'm going to talk a little bit about the youth, and I'm glad that that topic had been brought up. We know, and the FDA also tells us, that young people are more likely to take risks with their health, including using products that contain nicotine. Teens especially are susceptible to addiction to nicotine, whether that substance comes from cigarettes, e-cigarettes, or other tobacco products. The Surgeon General's advisory on e-cigarette use among youth suggests that we take aggressive steps to protect our children from these highly potent products that are risking a new generation of young people addicted to nicotine. The bad news is that e-cigarette use has become an epidemic among our nation's young people. However, the good news is that we know what works effectively to protect our children from all forms of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment reports that many communities in Kansas have instituted outdoor tobacco-free ordinance at parks, zoos, athletic fields, playgrounds, trails, and even city sidewalks and streets as a way to protect both children and environment. They also remind us that every year in Kansas, nearly 1,200 children under the age of 18 become new daily smokers. How do children learn how to talk, how to walk, and also how to play sports? They learn that from adults. It is our responsibility that we make sure that our children see smoke-free places where family-friendly places are, where families are involved. These places such as our playgrounds and also our parks. We want to make sure that children are seeing acceptable behavior. Parks are about clean air, natural beauty, and engaging in healthy activity, and smoking just doesn't fit in there. Lastly, discarded cigarette butts are a form of non-biodegradable litter. They are the most littered item in the world, as documented in your Young Lungs at Play document that you received earlier today by email. To research this statement, our local Boys and Girls Club decided to do an environmental survey on our very own city park. and collected over 400 pieces of tobacco-related litter. Tobacco-free parks are clean parks. Residents of Manhattan deserve to enjoy public spaces that are free from the health dangers associated with secondhand smoke and vaping. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Barbara Lee Wilson. I am a retired registered nurse and Antonio's mother. A lot of people in town know me as Mom. I work at the vape store. I started vaping when I was nursing in Oklahoma. Actually, I have COPD from smoking for 45 years, and unless I had found a way to try to quit smoking, I'd probably be dead today. I tried patches, gum, everything that you can think of. Vaping, the only thing that's kept me off of cigarettes and kept my lungs from deteriorating further. I've done a lot of study about it. And the one thing that really comes to mind is when you think about vaping and people that see the vapor come out of your mouth and they think of a cigarette or something like that. No. There is no secondhand anything that you could get from vaping. It all is a vapor that just dissolves into the air, and there's no nicotine in it. Nicotine, now you want to talk about nicotine a little bit, about as addicting as caffeine. Now you gotta have your cup of caffeine in the morning. Some people gotta have a little nicotine. Nicotine actually has properties that enhance memory, and they actually use it at times for Alzheimer's patients. So our brains actually have nicotine receptors in them. It's found in many foods, potatoes. Trying to think off the top of my head, and I can't right now, I'm sorry, but there's many different foods that contain nicotine. So I just want to say that you're all getting it wrong when you get talking about e-cigarettes and secondhand, and even putting us out with the people that smoke. I mean, that's cruel, you know, because cigarettes are awful, but vaping is not. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, appreciate it. Are you waiting there in the back? There's a lady in the back, I just wanted to make sure, okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Jennifer Green. I serve as the Administrative Director of Riley County Health Department and the Local Health Officer for Riley County. At the Health Department, our mission is to promote and protect the health and safety of our community with evidence-based practices, prevention, and education. So one way we do this is through advocating for the advancement of public health policy. And we do this work through, Shanika mentioned to you that she's our chronic disease risk reduction coordinator, and we have a grant from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment to support that work, including the support of the combining of the e-cigarette and no smoking ordinance before you this evening. So we've talked a lot about data and evidence tonight, so I want to kind of recap what we've heard. So what does the data, the research and the evidence by scientists tell us about individual cigarette use and e-cigarette use among adults and teens? So the U.S. Preventive Task Force, a group of health experts that makes recommendations about preventive health care in the U.S., concluded that the evidence is insufficient to recommend e-cigarettes for smoking cessation in adults, including pregnant women. The data does tell us that e-cigarettes may help non-pregnant adult smokers if used as a complete substitute for all cigarettes and other smoked tobacco products. Still, and this is a key point here, data indicates that most e-cigarette users do not stop using e-cigarettes and instead become dual users. And we've heard a little bit about that tonight. You might stop your e-cigarette, you might stop smoking, but you keep smoking e-cigarettes instead of quitting altogether. Data from the FDA shows that between 2017 and 2018, e-cigarette use among high school students increased 78%. And 48% among middle school students. That's significant for sure. And this is consistent with our local data. So data from the Kansas Community Set Care Survey indicates that e-cigarette use among Riley County high school students doubled between 2018 and 2019, so this past school year. E-cigarette use is popular among youth who have never picked up a traditional cigarette. We must create norms that help adults safely quit cigarettes and help young people from ever picking up a cigarette. And we can do that through policy change and policy norms. And this is evidence in the fact that since the original, the 2008 no smoking ordinance passed, the smoking rates in Riley County have declined from 21% among adults to 11%, so policy change works. There's a long-standing and clear and consistent evidence that secondhand smoke from traditional cigarettes causes illness and leads to early death. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is clear on this. There's no risk-free level of exposure to secondhand smoke. So what about secondhand smoke or secondhand vapor from e-cigarettes? In January 2018, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a consensus study that reviewed over 800 studies, different studies, and it concluded e-cigarettes both contain and emit a number of potentially toxic substances. Both the U.S. Surgeon General and the National Academies that I just noted have warned about the risk of inhaling secondhand e-cigarette emissions. That they concluded that secondhand emissions include nicotine and ultrafine particles that are related to asthma, flavorings such as diacetyl that's chemically linked to serious lung disease, and other particles such as benzene, which is found in car exhaust, and other heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead. Researchers and public health officials have a lot to learn about e-cigarettes and the long-term health effects. We don't know what we know about smoking. It's been 50 years, and we don't know what we know about traditional cigarettes. Still, the recommendation from public health experts is clear, and this is a quote from the CDC. If you've never smoked or used other tobacco products or e-cigarettes, don't start. Educational programs and awareness campaigns are great, and they help encourage our young people to stop smoking and are necessary. However, research shows that's not sufficient enough to change long-term behavior change. Knowing better does not always result in doing better. We need to create norms and policy change that will help that. And we can do that through a policy change like this. Earlier today, we submitted letters to you from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the Kansas Association of Local Health Departments, and the Public Health Advisory Council in support of the proposed ordinance. And I'll wrap up on a personal note. I'm a mom. I have a 2-year-old son, and in City Park, you'll find us playing next to Johnny Caw or a Goodenough Park. And on more than one occasion, we have encountered smokers in the park. And as a mom who just happens to work at the health department, it's my job to help us protect the health of the community, but also my little one at home. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else, please? All right, seeing no one, we'll close the public comment period and come back to the commission for further discussion, comments. And need to make sure that we give him the guidance that he asked for too, so.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. So first, I did quite a bit of research on this today, and I'm not sure there's a lot of, in my opinion, fake news out there. At the beginning, I would say I researched from the American Heart Association, Johns Hopkins, a lot of national science institutes, and it did always, most of those articles or most of those studies did start with when you compare vaping, and most of these are older comparatively to what's been happening recently. When you compare vaping to smoking, it is less harmful. But in some regards, I think that's kind of like me saying that this Dr. Pepper is better for me to drink than a Bud Light. If we're all being honest with each other, they're both unhealthy and they're both going to slowly kill me. So just because it's healthier than smoking doesn't mean that it's for the public good that we allow it to happen, right? So, and one other point just about the flavors and the reason why I asked about the flavors, I grew up in a family of smokers. Everybody around me smoked. I had no desire when I turned 18 to smoke. I thought it was disgusting. I thought the smell was disgusting. But I actually did start vaping for a period of time from about the age of 19 into my 20s because of the taste and smell. The flavors are what enticed me to start vaping. I never ever had a desire to smoke cigarettes, but I did have a desire to vape, and I did it for a while until I learned that the consequences of vaping and the nicotine contained in them are almost just as harmful as cigarettes. So luckily I stopped. But to say that young people are not enticed into smoking because of these flavors, I think is a little bit of a falsehood, because I can speak from experience. I am one of the people who did that. I just kind of wanted to put those out there first. So in terms of our proposed ordinance and the draft ordinance, I'm supportive of everything, including allowing the grandfathering in of the current vape shops. I would err more on the side of not allowing vaping to continue within stores. I don't think we need to have consistency, but I don't think that we can go backwards in letting the tobacco shops allow smoking in there. And those businesses have been able to stay open even though smoking is not in those facilities. So I would err on the side of not allowing smoking to happen in those facilities, but allowing them to stay open. The only thing within that ordinance that gives me a little bit of hesitation is the patio and outdoor space, and banning that, just because, again, I'm thinking of this one scenario where someone cannot smoke on the patio of a bar, and I think about, like, when I'm out, I can easily avoid people who are smoking on patios and bars. What scares me is we're just pushing those individuals out to the sidewalk, and you said 20 feet, but you think about any entrance in Aggieville, it's probably pretty easy to find a 20-foot space on a sidewalk that's not within the entrances of buildings. I don't think it's anything that we should pull out of the ordinance right now, but I think it's something that we should watch. I don't really want to be walking down the sidewalk and have to be forced to walk through someone who's smoking because I can't avoid them on the sidewalk. And I don't know how to prevent that without just saying no smoking allowed in the city of Manhattan. At least on outdoor patios, they were contained to some level and I could avoid them. That's really the only thing that gives me hesitation, but nonetheless, I don't think it's significant enough to fully stop this from moving forward. So did I answer all the questions that you needed answered?
Yeah, I will say before we move forward, because the word grandfathering has been thrown around, and that is something, again, that city administration isn't recommending, because when you do that, we are essentially, we are going to continue to treat people inconsistently, because right now retail tobacco stores aren't allowed to use tobacco within their stores, so we were already not allowing them, but we're going to allow 4 existing stores to use e-cigarettes within their stores. But then you have another store that comes along in 5 years that wants to come into the market, have a store, but then they're going to be treated differently than the other stores because they were there first.
Okay,
so we're going to be, so what we recommend is you treat both stores, e-cigarette stores and a tobacco store, consistently, which would mean you either allow them in all retail tobacco stores and e-cigarettes moving forward, and they can use that product within those stores, or you prohibit it within all of those.
So, I'm sorry for being,
And I'd have to defer to Katie, but I think just drafting that language too is pretty difficult too from an ordinance perspective, from a grandfathering.
Well, grandfathering is not exactly the concept that you're talking about.
Yeah.
In the ordinances that we've done where you've grandfathered something, there was some kind of documentation to record a right. So in a zoning situation, you have a property use that's occurring, and there's a record of that property use, and that property use can continue because it's grandfathered, because there's a record of that change and that use. Same with licenses and permits, where you say, if you were permitted as of this date and you existed before, you have these special rights, there's a process. This is just a business regulation. It's none of those other things. And so what Jared's saying is that the concept of grandfathering doesn't really fit this type of regulation, because the purpose of the regulation, you're saying either it's a health hazard and we want to protect people in those stores from not being exposed to smoke, or we are exempting those stores because that's the nature of their business, and if you enter that, you're taking that risk. But to say that some we're okay with the health hazard existing and some we're not, it's not a grandfathering. It's not the same type of action as like a zoning or a permit or a license. So that's our hesitation, is that it's a business regulation and it's not some kind of other status.
yeah, no, I totally understand that. I guess I just didn't make myself clear. I don't think that vaping should, that's what I meant. I don't think vaping should happen in vape shops. I don't think smoking of any kind should happen in any public space,
Okay.
any shop. I guess when I use the term grandfathering, and I'm not even sure we could do something like this, I meant keep those establishments, but don't allow any new establishments to be formed.
And that's what I'm talking about, is that's the difficulty, is the new establishment would have a different business regulation than an existing establishment. If you want to license or permit those businesses, which I'm not recommending that, but then you have a different construct to have different rules for the businesses. But what if I understand you right, Commissioner, you're suggesting that the existing, anyone who's existing now, they could have smoking in those establishments?
No,
Okay.
I'm talking about two totally different things.
Okay.
Thing one is smoking within public businesses. No, I don't care if it's a tobacco shop or a vape shop. The second thing is not allowing new vape shops or new smoke shops to exist.
Okay, I'm sorry, I did
And I'm saying
misunderstand
no
that.
to that.
So you're recommending that you not allow the starting a business or anything like that?
Isn't that what we do with tobacco shops currently?
That would be
No.
a
No.
separate ordinance.
We prohibit smoking within retail tobacco stores. Anyone right now can open up a retail tobacco store tomorrow if they'd like to. They wouldn't be allowed to smoke in it, but they would be allowed to sell tobacco products.
So that is where my misinterpretation
Okay.
was, and I apologize for that. Unlike the other commissioners, I have not been a part of the 17
No, and you weren't here in
discussions about this.
2016, yeah.
No. So I apologize, that was
That's
my
okay.
misinterpretation. Either way, though, okay, then I just don't want smoking in public facilities. Is that answer all your questions?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. Linda?
I would like to say that I'm proud of our community, and being a leader with the petition initially, that was jumping out front of the city and a lot of other communities. And it was a good, firm policy. And I think for the time, look, it's been since 2008 when it, we've gone over 10 years, and there are new products, new techniques, all of that. I am opposed, actually, to smoking in public places, and it's hard to address these changing markets, but it's I do support raising the age to 21, and I support restricting flavors. I have a clipping here that says that the president is even, says that President Trump will act, the federal government will act to ban thousands of flavors used in e-cigarettes. So whenever that happens, we never know. I do support the fines. I prefer, I think that it ought to be no less than instead of exceeding, but I can probably, if that's the will of the commission, I can accept that. Not allowing smoking in retail stores. I support, when in 2016, I supported not allowing vaping in vape stores, but the rest of the commission didn't follow that. So I still support that. I think that smoking in public places, I don't want to allow exceptions. We just keep, there'll be other exceptions if we do that, I think. And I agree about not allowing flavors. With regard to the number of feet away from an access or an entrance, I think the state law of 10, I support our 20 feet distance.
Commissioner, I will just jump in. The
Yep.
draft ordinance does not address, I know you're voicing some of your opinions about it, but the draft ordinance doesn't address flavors or age.
But this is a work session, so it could if we wanted
It
it
could,
to, right?
it could, yes.
Yeah.
If the
And
commission
it
wants to.
doesn't address age either.
So that's
Yeah.
why I think, I just want to make sure that we're all
Yeah,
clear,
you
that
could-
it's appropriate for the commissioner to be saying that.
And that's
Yeah.
also how we get on down the road and think we did something and we didn't. So I remember the patio issue. I just want to be I want us to make sure that we cover it and that we're consistent. And I appreciate K-State's approach, which is a tobacco and vape-free campus. And I think that we have to take this seriously and look how long it took our country, our health, our governments to realize the effects of cigarettes over the years. It took 40 years at least, with lots of people saying these are dangerous. We now have a whole population of people with respiratory problems and emphysema and COPD, and they're really having an impact on the costs of healthcare in this country. And so there is an impact, and it's major. It is not something we can just take lightly and say, oh, well, let each person kill themselves. That's not what we ought to be doing. So those are, did I cover everything? Parks, I support banning them in parks. I support the signs. Whatever you have to do to convince people, and in one sign or two, that smoking is not allowed. And I think I've covered the other two. Thank you. I would like to ask, too, that the documents that the Health Department or Wellness Coalition sent to commissioners via email today, it wasn't in our packet. I would like to make sure that that's part of our public record. Because that, to me, you know, there are people who say, show me the data. The data is in. So that's what I think we need to do.
We can certainly put that in the packet when it comes back as a first
That'd be
reading.
great. Thank you.
Win?
All right, I guess, you know, quick philosophy, I don't smoke or vape, so I don't have a dog in the hunt. I've never done that. Don't particularly care for it, you know, and I agree with some of the comments. We spent a lot of time in the Army picking up cigarette butts in my day, and never did find that to be enjoyable. But my philosophy is, though, you know, we got to support what's legal. And it's not illegal to have a smoke shop, and it's not illegal to have a vape shop. And I think the country's history on prohibition was not a good one when they decided to ban alcohol. And so I put a smoke shop and a vape shop maybe in the same category as all the bars we have in town. Now, if it's unhealthy to smoke and vape and we need to close those, then we need to close all the bars too. I don't think that's gonna fly. And so I've got maybe a libertarian view on that. You know, you do have a freedom to do stupid stuff in this country. And I'm not sure the government's role is to ban that entirely, and that's what troubles me on that. So based on our ordinance, I support 90% of it. but I've got a couple specific points. And the first one is this whole idea that we're gonna ban future vape shops or smoke shops. That's just not the capitalist method until it becomes illegal to do that by state or federal law. So I don't want to go down that route at all. Then secondly, I think that you have to be consistent. So you either ban it in all of them, or smoke shops can smoke and vape shops can smoke. I think I would support, letting people vape in a vape shop, smoke in a smoke shop. Why? If I own a winery, I can give them samples of wine. A retail liquor store, according to ABC laws, can pass out samples. What's the difference when we talk consistency? So that's the issue. It's got to be consistent across all those platforms. So based on that, should you ban smoking in all places of employment? No. The exception being a smoke shop and a vape shop. Then the area that Commissioner McKee brought up, because it got me thinking about that, the non-enclosed areas of a current restaurant. And I go to several of them in town, and I know there's a lot of smokers that will get up and leave, and they sneak out in the back onto the patio, and it's 20 feet away from the door, and they do whatever they're gonna do, and then they come back. I've got some friends that do that smoke, and that's how they've handled the ordinance. So I don't really think we wanna go with such an extreme ban to prevent that, because then where are they gonna go? And my wife, ER nurse at Mercy, I still call it Mercy Hospital, it's Ascension, for many years, and they banned smoking on their campus. So what does everybody do that smokes in that hospital for a smoke break? They go outside, cross the street into the KSU parking lot, which is also, right, smoke-free supposedly. All right, it's sort of ridiculous, because the people that do that are going to do it. And so what we have to do is not make it too restrictive. So I think that, if I own an establishment, a restaurant, and I have a non-enclosed patio, I should be able to designate that part of that patio that I don't want people to smoke by putting one of our signs. But I should also be able to leave a space there that's 20 feet away from an access point, where if people want to go there and smoke and it doesn't bother my customers, please let them. Because otherwise they're going someplace else, into somebody else's parking lot, and there's where the cigarette butts are going to end up. So I've got an issue with that. When it comes to the parks, again, I just assume nobody's smart there, smoke in there, because when we were doing the Johnny Caw dedication just a few weeks ago, I know one gentleman was walking around with a cigar, right there where I was selling bobbleheads, and that sort of irritated me, but I guess it was legal. So I don't really have a problem with that, but I also think that it's probably not enforceable. If somebody's going down a linear trail with a e-cigarette, what's RCPD gonna do? Put a guy out there in a duck blind to arrest him? I mean, some of it's just not enforceable. It's just like, it's just like the ban on, the cell phones while driving. I thought that was a good one, but again, it's marginally effective. So I'm more in favor of going with the 20 feet, around the various facilities and things like that, and forget about it if somebody's walking out there in, Warner Park in the wilderness and wants to smoke a cigar. I mean, I don't think that's gonna cause us a real issue. And so that's basically, my points is, really relook that enclosed area, food establishment, so that's got some flexibility, and let's keep this thing consistent so that, if a guy wants to open a smoke shop, fine, just like the guy that wants to give out samples at a winery, it should be okay. Does that cover the key things? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of the items here, but I did want to hear from RCPD, Dennis Butler. Did you see any kind of uptick or even one citation before or after the 2016 ordinance that we put in place for e-cigarettes? What are your thoughts on e-cigarettes?
Well, I don't know about citations. I'd have to get the data and come back and provide that, or send you all an email with it. But I've been through this similar process 2 other times, and as was mentioned earlier, with smoking, when I was in Virginia, it was about 10 years, 15 years prior to what happened in Kansas. The restaurant owners and bar owners came out en masse and claimed it was going to kill their business, and just like, I forgot who mentioned it, it's exactly the opposite. You actually attracted more people out to those businesses that wouldn't go before, and so that did not happen. When I was in Ottawa, I think it was 2006 or 7 before the state passed their statute. Same thing. Everybody came out, and I told folks, I said, you know, this is not going to turn out the way the business owners think. It's going to be okay, and the same thing happened again. I will say this: when it comes to enforcing ordinances involving quality of life issues, I know there's a health component to this. Typically, my experience also in both places was there was a little bit of enforcement in the beginning due to reports, but then it dropped off. We didn't get as many calls about it. We didn't deal with it that often. As far as proactive enforcement, it was very rare that officers would enforce it proactively. They were more inclined to give warnings whenever they would see it to gain compliance, but typically they wouldn't see that person again, so there wouldn't be an opportunity to issue a citation or make an arrest. So as far as what happened here in 2016, I would have to get the data for you and supply it if that's what you would like.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. You know, the city of Manhattan has been very forward-thinking in lots of ways, having the non-smoking ordinance when it came in place. I do remember when everybody thought it was going to kill their businesses, and it didn't. When we did the cell phone ban, there was a lot of citations at the beginning. I'm not sure people use less, but there was a lot of that, about $150 each time they were caught. Passing the LGBT protected class ordinance, the massage therapy licensing, and now e-cigarettes. These are things that Manhattan has been forward on before other communities. And I think this is something that we've considered in 2016, and now maybe we need to put more into it. I think not having it in our parks, I think that's something we should be doing. I don't think anybody, I know when I'm at a park or see someone smoking, it doesn't bother me as much, but I don't have children anymore. And certainly we see cigarette butts, or I'm sure e-cigarettes don't have that kind of material on the ground. But nevertheless, I don't mind prohibiting it on our trails. Even if it is hard to enforce, it's, we're not rewarding, or we're making sure that behavior is frowned upon in our community. That is not acceptable in our parks, in our city areas, city properties. Signage is important. I think it's important to have both the vaping and the smoking signage wherever we have it in our community. I don't know the signage that's on campus. It's been a while since I've been on campus to see if they have any kind of signage for their doors, but I think it should be consistent with the campus or with the school district, with Fort Riley, whoever else might have similar signage. There shouldn't be two different things, 2 or 3 different types of signage. It needs to be consistent is what I'm thinking about. Fines, I'm okay with the way the fines are, but I do think it needs to be clear and say owner and manager. It just says, you know, $100, second violation, $50, first, whatever it might be. I think it needs to be saying owner and manager, so it's not an argument, no types of arguments would come up if it was very clear about that. The stores, I think it's probably best not to have it, not to have smoking within the stores. To sell it would be fine. I think the more I think about this, wine is very different. We're talking about something that's very, in my opinion, nicotine is addictive. And if we continue that process, we are promoting it. If it's someone wants to purchase it and take it to their own home, that's different in my opinion, but it at least stops people from just doing it in one space. We are seeing more and more data come out about this. You know, when people are saying there's deaths involved and children, as a school teacher, I see children all the time, and to think about middle schoolers, I know even elementary school that, you know, where they were starting to smoke early. If we were having a trend where fewer teenagers were not smoking anymore, but now the increase is there because of vaping, that's a concern to me. We are now making something that was frowned upon be okay and almost be sexy in a way, because now there's no restrictions on it. So, and the flavor of it obviously makes it even better. I don't mind increasing the age to 21 if that's something we can do as a city. I also don't mind taking away the flavoring of it. Although in that instance, I want more data. I mean, if the gentleman that spoke to us said it's not the flavoring, but it is more about the nicotine salts, I don't know enough about that industry. So I would like to be more clear about that before I say no flavoring, because that is new to me. That is something I just heard tonight, and I need to know more about that and not just adhere it to flavoring. I think flavoring makes it more enticing for young people, but I need to know both of those factors, and I would like more information about flavoring and nicotine salts separately. But I would not be opposed if flavoring is one of the main conduits for addictive behavior, and especially in our young people. Other than that, I just say work closely with RCPD, work closely with the university. I don't mind having the 20 feet. I mean, if Kansas State University has totally banned it on their campus, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal for us to do it off campus. I don't see many people smoking anywhere, nor do I hear anybody saying, gosh, I wish I could smoke inside now. Nobody even thinks twice about it. I'm surprised that airplanes still have a no smoking bell that comes on. I don't know why they just don't get rid of it. You can't smoke on airplanes anymore. So I think that's just the way we're going, and I want to see more of it. And this is a community that embraces families and individuals' health. So I think this is something we need to do, and let the state go where they go. But as elected officials for the city, this is in the best interest of our community.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts here, and then I've got some specific questions on the ordinance itself. When we started looking at this prior to adopting the last ordinance in 2016, one of our motivations was that this would help get people off of cigarettes. And at the time, most of you recall, I mean, most of this was basically white vapor. I mean, that was the discussion we had, was primarily white vapor, and how that could help get people off cigarettes. Well, since that time, things have changed quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of science out there now. And so as opposed to being alternative to cigarettes, it has actually grown into something far different, and that is unattracted in its own right. And I think the addition of the flavors has made this a very appealing thing. When you look at how children learn, I think it was mentioned before, you've got this patterning effect. So if you see the older kids, adults, going around and there are all these clouds of vapor coming out, this makes it rather attractive, I think, to kids. And particularly if you add a flavor in there, I mean, this is like selling candy. So that is kind of where I'm coming from. Now, I think we're gonna have a difficult period for, let's say, 5 years or 10 years, unfortunately, where the science is going to try to sort this out. And, I mean, this is kind of what guides what we're able to do, and balancing the kind of the authorities that you have in adulthood versus the rights of others if you're around this kind of activity. So, at least in the near term, I think that this age of 18 is okay, but I wouldn't, I'd also think, as we do with alcohol, it's probably worth looking at to increase that. And right now, I think the problem would be almost impossible to police if we ban flavors, although, as I said previously, I think flavors is one of the problems, because it's making it attractive to people and attractive to younger people. The problem I have with that, though, is that we have consenting adults who have access to alcohol, which is arguably either as dangerous or more dangerous than cigarettes. So I agree with what Wynn's thought on that are. Now, if you go to the second page of the ordinance here, under definitions, does the 20 feet have any science-based information, or is this just 20 feet because it's 20 feet?
It's 20 feet because it's 20 feet. That was what was passed in 2008 in the smoking ordinance, and we reflected that same provision in the e-cigarette ordinance. The state prohibits it within 10 feet of any access point.
Yeah.
Ours is more strict.
I just think, as a couple have mentioned, I think we've got to, this doesn't seem to be very practical. I mean, unless you put a chalk mark on the sidewalk. So I think we have to make sure that this thing can accommodate where others can smoke and vape without impacting the people in the establishment who don't wish to do so or have it as a secondhand element. So I'm not sure the 20-foot rule is the right way to do that, and I agree with Commissioner McKee. We've got to make sure that there's some place that's defined as an outdoor space that, or non-enclosed space that can accommodate it.
So I will say, my understanding though is you would still, at the minimum, have to comply with the state law of a 10-foot rule.
Yes.
So,
I mean, you can't go against state law. I'm just saying the 20 feet doesn't make, I mean, I don't know how you do that with a 12-foot sidewalk.
you wouldn't be able to smoke there.
Yeah, you have to go in the street, smoke behind the car. I mean, that just seems silly to me. So I guess to make it easier for you, I'd say with the 10 feet. The other one that, when we talk about food service establishments down in subparagraph 7, mobile restaurants. So if you've got one of these things that's on a trailer, which rule applies? In other words, is this a 20-foot rule there?
Yes, I believe so. So you wouldn't be able to smoke or use an e-cigarette within 20 feet of a, like a food truck.
Yeah, that's somewhat inconsistent with having open space, so we may want to relook those kinds of things. I just think that competes with some of our ideas about a non-enclosed area. When you go to subparagraph 11 and you talk about state and county offices, is that, maybe this is for Katie, but are we allowed to exercise an ordinance over those two municipal governments, or?
Are you talking about the definition of public building? That's from the state law. So your question, if I understand it, is could we actually write a citation for someone who violates the law on those? And we actually could in this case because it's a criminal ordinance, and so if someone violates it in those locations, we can prosecute it.
Let's see here. Now, in paragraph 14, when we say smoke or smoking, it says possession of a lighted cigarette, cigar pipe, or so on. Then you go back to subparagraph 3 where it's talking about vaping. Is that consistent? In other words, I assume you can hold a vaping device that's not, it doesn't activate until you actually draw on it. Is that correct?
You're saying that the vape doesn't emit from
In other words, if you're just holding a vaping device, nothing's happening. Is that right?
Just like if you were holding a unlit cigarette,
Yeah.
nothing would be happening. So
Okay.
it's the use of actually smoking or vaping that would be prohibited.
Yeah. I also agree with Commissioner Butler. I don't know, I agree that putting this in effect in parks makes sense because you're around others, but on these trails, I don't know how you'd ever enforce it, and I don't think it's reasonable. Now, on signs, we have so much fascination with signs in this city. We have signs everywhere, and I know sometimes we're driven by KDOT or others, but I would like to see, if we make signs required, then we've got to have them sized. Otherwise you get the sign that this big, people can't see, and then you mandate another sign that's a certain size. So you'll set a sign size, that would be good, reasonable to a front door. Now, it's even worse if we don't think about how we do signage in the park. if you think of what we've caused to happen for parking signs in non-public parking spots, you know, we have to have a sign every 10 feet until the parking lot is less than 50 cars, and then it changes to something that's defined by RCPD, but not really for over 50. So I don't want that to happen in the park.
We, within that section, number 3, we leave that to the discretion of the Parks and Rec director. So we don't necessarily define that it needs to be every 10 feet or every 15 feet. It's up to our staff to determine where.
What I'm
those signs
telling you
should
is
be.
I'd like it to be defined, so we don't have this argument in 5 years. If it's at the entry, that's fine with me, but I don't want signs everywhere, even though that's his discretion. I do not want signs everywhere in the park.
I don't think that's the intent, to put them everywhere. I know it could.
Jason, or Jared, that may not be the intent. What I'm saying is I don't want it that way. So take that back when you write the ordinance.
I'm just trying to point out the difficulty in defining, because we have so many different parks and recreation areas, that those rules are, it'll be very exhaustive, I think, to define all of those within each trail, each park, entrances, things like that. So we can certainly take a look at it, but that's just.
I just don't want signs all over the park. And that's what's gonna happen, because we'll err on the side of safety. And I also support the combined signs, so we don't have one of each. There's one on the fines that I'm not sure I agree with. Each individual allowed to smoke or use an e-cigarette by a person who owns, manages, operates, or otherwise controls the use of any public place or other area where smoking or the use of e-cigarettes is prohibited in violation of subsection 2 shall be considered a separate violation. So if you're the proprietor and there's 5 people smoking in the back, you have 5 citations.
That's correct. That's from the state law. So we don't have a lot of flexibility to change that. That's the way that the formula the state law provides to count citations.
For
The proprietors.
both smoking? or
Yes, that-
Smoking and e-cigarettes?
Well, for e-cigarettes, we've just applied the same counting method to e-cigarettes that the state law establishes for the smoking formula, since it's all in one combined ordinance.
Okay. And on the last one, for the same reasons that Commissioner Butler stated, consenting adults, I wish it was different, but I think that if you're in a vape shop as a consulting adult, you ought to be able to vape, same thing in a smoking shop. As long as you're not hurting anybody else. The problem, there's a small problem in there, and that's the employees, but that's part of the employment problem for the employer. So I feel strongly the other way, that we ought not have that, or we ought not have the proliferation of alcohol, but unfortunately, I mean, that ship has sailed.
Mayor, can I add one thing?
Sure.
Just one thing that I think that, especially the next time that this comes up, that we need to think about. I mean, we've talked a lot about just like the health to the individual person. And I actually had a discussion with someone comparing this to alcohol earlier too. I think the foundation of what this ordinance is and what we need to keep in mind is I can go into a sports bar and watch a game and make a choice not to drink alcohol. And someone else drinking alcohol next to me doesn't present health consequences for me. I don't have that same ability when it comes to smoking. If I walk through someone's smoke in a public facility, they've just made a health decision for me, and that is unfair. And so that is why, if we're going to ban, that's kind of my thought around banning it in vape shops too. I could go into a vape shop with a friend who vapes privately at their home or wherever, and maybe I don't personally vape, but if you're vaping in that public space, again, I didn't make a decision to inhale that smoke or for you to blow that smoke in front of me. And so I don't think anybody's arguing that alcohol, especially in excess, is just as bad for you as smoking is. The difference is, one of those things, you're making that choice, and that choice doesn't affect me. Smoking in a public place absolutely does affect me. I have health consequences for that, and I think that's the two very kind of different things when we talk about alcohol and smoking. And so as we continue to talk about this, that's the foundation of what this law is and what we're trying to prevent, and it's just something I think kind of probably got lost in the rest of the conversation that we should keep in mind.
Yes.
Can you just reiterate what you got out of this as far as each of those points? I just want to make sure, because I think there were difference of opinion, and I don't know which got the 3 and which got 2 or
So
which
I
got 4.
heard a majority of commissioners.
I think what we have to do in this case, we can't vote, so.
No,
if he-
but I didn't
if
know
he-
what the draft was going to be.
Well, if he comes back with the draft, he'll have either ors in there, and we'll have to vote at that time, because otherwise, we're basically voting now, and we have to be careful.
So
Yeah.
there won't necessarily be either ors in the draft ordinance. We're gonna draft the ordinance for first reading based on the feedback of a majority of commissioners who would like to see that provision. So when we come back with a first reading on a draft ordinance, from what I've heard from feedback from the city commissioners tonight, there was a majority of commissioners who wanted to keep the draft as it related to parks. There was a majority of commissioners that wanted to keep the draft ordinance as it is related to signs. There was a majority of commissioners that wanted to keep the draft ordinance related to fines. And then there was a majority of commissioners who wanted to keep the draft ordinance as is related to stores. I only heard a few commissioners bring up patios, and when I say a few, I mean less than a majority, so 2 or less. Only a few brought up patios and looking into that. Only a few brought up the pursuit of age and flavors. And then the mayor, you're the only one who's commented on access points and reducing that to the state law of 10.
That will be incorporated into our discussion that comes to legislative session.
Yeah, we're gonna bring forth the draft ordinance for first reading that reflects the feedback we got tonight.
The only thing I would add is some of these comments weren't either ors. They were nuances to some of the things that are existing in the language. So I would ask you as you go through that, not to just say we had 3 or 4 for the entire thing or 2 that were against it. There's items in there that need to be addressed that are just changes that don't either say we're for the whole thing or against it.
I guess I just have a difficulty of how we would reflect that in an ordinance when only 1 or 2 commissioners brought up that certain nuance and didn't get feedback from other commissioners about
I
those.
think what I hear the mayor saying is sometimes when we do these things, even though we were quiet, doesn't necessarily mean we didn't agree with it. So maybe access points is something I would like to see what that would look like as far as signage in parks. I would like a little bit more information about flavors and nicotine, even though I didn't hear anybody else say that. I hope there's just a little bit more information instead of just the ordinance in front of us. And I think that's what the discussion when we have our regular session would provide is some of those options as we draft the final ordinance to be, so we can have more discussion. Does that make sense?
Well, that would pretty much, I mean, if we want to have those discussions about those things, we would need to come back with another discussion item and not a first reading if we're going to bring up a lot of different provisions that we would need legal input to draft those.
I would like for another commissioner to speak to the age issue if they are inclined.
I did. I do want to see if we can make it 21.
I do too.
And I did want more information about flavors, so.
See, my point on that initially, the legal issues of this, a lot of this is gonna be driven by what the federal government, state government does. And so I'll just go along with what they have. Right now they got it 18, they change it to 21, fine. Change it to 25, fine. That's okay with me. but I don't want to see ours be different on that. And the same thing with these flavors, that they're probably not a good thing, but they're not illegal. It's just like, marijuana is illegal. We don't have marijuana shops. They do in Colorado. All right, it just depends on which way the state and the federal government goes, on that. So I don't really want to get ahead of the curve there, because who knows what's going to happen in the next, couple of years. So those governing agencies may change that. And on the parks thing, like I said, I think, I can live with banning it all. I don't think it's enforceable. That's fine. I wouldn't vote no on the ordinance because of that. That's not a great crisis. But I do not like the idea of putting a monopoly on existing vape shops, because that's what we're doing when we say, try to write something that says, okay, we got 3 of them and they can stay in existence and new ones can't come in, or anything of that nature. That consistency is a big thing. And it gets to the heart of the foundation of the country, where you've got a freedom to do stupid things. And I don't think the government, should be telling you that you can't do some of those stupid things. And that's the problem with a vape shop. And I get the idea, a guy vaping in a vape shop. As Commissioner McKee said, he called it a public place. Well, maybe, but I see that it's a little bit different. I know it's a vape shop. I know they're vaping in there. So if my buddy's going in there to buy the stuff, I'm going to tell him that's a bad plan to go buy it, and I'm also not going in with him. That's my viewpoint on that. And the same with a bar. If I go to a local drinking establishment and, to watch a football game, I don't want to see anybody, vaping next to me or smoking. I hate it. Okay, but I don't have a problem if those guys get up and go outside and there's a designated area that's 10 or 20 feet from the door that doesn't bother anybody else in the place, let them. But we shouldn't be driving them across the street like they were doing at the hospital and walking all the way into K-State's parking lot to do it. I mean, that's just an issue. And I know that a lot of these people are addicted, and they're going to take those smoke breaks, and that's always aggravated me as an employer. And at a certain point, it becomes a real nasty thing if you don't accommodate them, because they're going to make time to do it, and they're going to be forced to violate the laws. And I saw that in the military. We went so far as to eliminate all that stuff, and you'd go out on field problems and people would have nicotine fits, and they couldn't get their cigarettes and all those kind of things because they weren't in the rations anymore. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I don't think we want to go too extreme. But I'm 90% for the contents of this thing. It's just a couple of those. I think we need to protect the individual rights of people that do stuff that we don't like.
To Commissioner Morris's point, I would actually be totally fine having another discussion at a work session and bring back more information on what we could do in terms of age and limiting flavors as well. I'm open to that as well. I'm not in a rush to have to vote on a first draft of something. And to lay something out again, if you are a business open to the public, you are a public business. Just like all non-discrimination ordinances apply to you, if we're going to ban smoking at a bar, we should ban smoking at another type of public business. That's a caveat that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So, I don't think that we have to rush and vote on something. I would be happy to make sure that we're visiting this topic thoroughly. And this is the first time, at least I've been on the commission, that we've discussed it. So,
could I make the recommendation that we have an ordinance that's fairly well polished and acceptable? We could bring that back and to a first reading, and we could discuss the elements that you'd like to. But as Jared said earlier, the issue of banning flavors and sale to 21, it'd be in a separate article and a separate ordinance anyway. So rather than delaying something that does reduce a lot of the ambiguity we have in some of the enforcement issues, if we could put that part in place, then we could go ahead and start on the second part, and the next article is a separate ordinance, unless you see that there will be a lot of overlap, which I don't see from a legal perspective that there'll be a lot of overlap, and that we'd have to change this ordinance if we do those other things.
I think that makes sense.
Okay, if
That's
we
just
could
my
get this part done and then bring you the second part of things if you prefer.
Fine with me.
Okay,
For
thank
me,
you.
the fact that one of the newspaper articles I have is that over 25 cities in Kansas have raised the legal age to purchase vaping products or cigarette, I guess, to age 21 is compelling. And I think that that's where we're headed, and I think I would like to do that for Manhattan and this community. I'd rather err on the side of our community being healthy and discouraging respiratory issues for the future generations. We were, because of the courage of the citizens that passed the petition, our community was one of the first ones that passed a non-smoking ordinance, as I recall anyway. I thought that was courageous. And short of having to do that again, I want us to be a leader in this area and not be one that lags behind. I think we have a large young population here, and we need to be thinking about their health and the health costs to our society.
Yeah, the only part that I'd like you to do some more thinking on is the part of defining signs. I'm concerned about that because of what's happened with our parking signs and signs all over the community. So take that back and look at it. I'd just like to ask the commission, is everybody kind of the opinion that we should have a first reading as the next step and then don't need further discussion except a future discussion about age and flavoring and so on?
I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, I think that sounds appropriate, till we get it right, but I do think this is something we need to, I feel like we're already late. I mean, it's already October, so I want to get something in place. And just to speak to a few other commissioners' points, you know, I think Manhattan has always been on the forefront. We never waited for the state and federal to make decisions for our community, and this is one of those cases where we are doing what's in the best interest of our community. We don't need to say, well, they're going to do it anyway. No, we don't know what they're going to do, and this is what we're going to do now. So, and I do feel a certain sense of urgency in this matter.
See, I don't have a problem with delaying the, you know, the thing on the flavors and all that, because I think there is some more information needed. But, you know, my only concern on this is I get it. Everybody wants to social engineer people's behaviors. You know, you want to social engineer their behaviors. But my problem still is that, you know, we always talk good about equal opportunity, but there is a form of discrimination in here, and it's against those people that vape and smoke, because it's too restrictive on those things that I mentioned, you know, a little space for them to smoke in an open patio and some of that, and that bothers me. And I'm not a guy that does that stuff. So it's not going to affect me personally, and I sort of would like it if we banned it everywhere. That's fine with me. But I still think you got an obligation to think about, wait a minute here. You know, we're worried about everybody being treated equally, but those people that, you know, have got a problem with nicotine and that, I think they may be getting discriminated against in this ordinance on a couple of those places. And that's what I don't like about it.
Okay, you have enough, Jared?
I think so.
Probably more than you wanted, so.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, those are the only two items we had tonight. So with that, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody who came and attended and spoke.